Hey there, welcome back to the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. If you want to jump in on the program, 800-288-9227, 800-288-9227. We'll get back to hurricane coverage, because coming up after my next guest, you and I are going to have the discussion, because the more I look at this, the more I've just resolved that we need to get rid of FEMA, period, point blank, end of story. And I'll make the case in the next segment and talk to you about it. 800-288-9227. But my next guest, Brian Boyd from Boyd Intelligence, he does, he's counterterrorism specialist, law enforcement intelligence. He's got a career that's perfectly suited to talk about the 1 year mark since the October 7th attacks. And Brian, I got to start with saying that when October 7th happened, I didn't think we'd still be at this a year later.
Well, I don't think anybody did either. But in the ensuing 10 years prior to it, between Hezbollah and all these other Shia Muslim groups who've been firing rockets into Israel, this particular event went over the top because they grabbed a bunch of hostages. Usually when you kill an Israeli or two, there's always a bombing response, and that's been back and forth for years since the Iran-Iraq war. But when they took those hostages, it was just too much for the Israelis to handle, and they were caught off guard because it was an intelligence failure. They didn't see it coming. And so in the ensuing process, it just got to where they are not only overcommitted, but the way the hostage rescue business is, there's no way you could get them out, even with Delta, SEAL Team 6, and all of the Israeli special operations people. So it's been a serious war of hostage holding and an attempt to get rid of Hamas, which is the governing body of Gaza.
Yeah, well, with all those complications you just laid out, how does this end, Brian?
Well, it's going to end a couple of ways. If you kind of follow the most recent events, when the Houthis in Yemen fired a ballistic missile into Tel Aviv. That put everybody on notice because that was a shocking event. They got through the Iron Dome. And Hezbollah, the day after the attack with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, they began to firing rockets into Israel. So Israel's faced with a no-win situation, no pun intended. They have to do this to survive. And they're caught up in a situation where if they don't eliminate these threats, they're going to be under constant fear. Plus, the Iron Dome itself, which has been very successful with ballistic missiles, and the Iranians about to come up with a nuclear bomb, it won't protect them. So they have to take a very aggressive stance. They're going to have a I have to win situation, and they're going to play this game until they absolutely win. You got 200,000 Hezbollah fighters. They're Shia Muslims. They're funded, supported, and provided rockets by the Iranians. They're taking over the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government doesn't like them. Hezbollah is not popular. And you got all the Arab states around who are quietly cheering Israel on. The Arab states, if you were to talk to them in private, where you talk to the Egyptians, the Saudis, or the Jordanians, none of them want Hamas to win because they are upsetting the basic balance of power in the Middle East. These other countries want to have Israel to exist for coexistence and trade. So that's where it's at. And right now it's a question whether or not America is going to support the Israelis to complete this war.
I hear you. So let's go to the other big conflict. It's about, 1,000 miles north or so in Ukraine and Russia. Who knew that we would still be at it? And this is almost going into the third year because it was, February 2022 that it started?
Right.
How does this one end? How does this one end?
February 22nd. Well, it's going to end with our political situation here. If this current administration continues on and Kamala Harris the winner, they're going to continue the same policy. If you switch to the Republicans and Trump comes aboard, he's going to negotiate a peace. He won the election the previous time because he didn't like war. And during his tenure, there was no war because he understood the economics of it. I think the easiest illustration of showing how the Trump administration handles opponents is when he stepped across the line and shook hands with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. I would never have guessed anybody would have done that in my lifetime. More people have been killed on that Korean border than anything else. But he had a different approach. He looked at the economy, and I think he brokered deals with China, and he understands that that's what most countries deal with. And he's not in favor of belligerent people. He's not in favor of belligerent war planners. He looks for ways to solve the thing as a businessman. So I think it'll be different. It'll depend on who's elected, and that will help change and shape our foreign policy.
All right, Brian Boyd, tell them where they find your work outside of WBAP.
BoydIntelligence.com. I live in Naples, Florida. We're about to have a major hurricane hit us here within the next 24 hours.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, you're about to get some rain, huh?
We already got lots and lots of rain. The streets are already flooded. The ground is so soaked there's nowhere for it to go. It's already causing flooding on a lot of the condominiums along the coast here. So, but yeah, it's going to hit. We just got through Helene. We're going to have this one. So it's going to be dicey.
All right, well, best of luck. Thank you for your time, Brian Boyd. Go batten down the hatches. Do what you got to do. BoydIntelligence.com. BoydIntelligence.com. And yeah, we're going to talk about that next with this new hurricane. You and I need to have a talk. I don't think you understand how ridiculously bad FEMA is at their job. And since I've actually had to live through some FEMA garbage, I'm going to relay that to you next and ask you, is it time to get rid of FEMA? 800-288-9227. 800-288-9227. This is The James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Hey there, welcome to The James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. In a time when Hurricane Helene has devastated Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and a whole swath from Florida to Virginia, we're also looking at a new hurricane, Hurricane Milton. Now a Category 5, as big as it can possibly be. They've run out of colors on the radar here on the Weather Channel, and it's headed toward Florida. It's goofing up the Yucatan Peninsula right now. It seems like a weird time to be saying we need to get rid of FEMA, but here it is. We need to get rid of FEMA. I was totally ignorant to what real disaster recovery looked like growing up in East Texas. You know, I mean, aside from some tornadoes here and there, we didn't do hurricanes. We never had blizzards or whatever. So disasters were something that I always saw on TV. Then when I moved to New Orleans and had to live through a few hurricanes, oh my goodness, you have no idea how bad FEMA is. If you've never lived down there or lived in one of those areas, Florida, or, you know, I was in New Orleans on the Gulf Coast, I mean, you have no idea how bad they are. In fact, okay, so when Katrina happened, I was working at a radio station in Oklahoma. We did the little fundraiser here where some, you know, gallant trucker called in. He's like, hey, I'm an owner operator. I'm just going to park my rig at the Walmart across from your station and we'll fill it up with supplies and I'll drive it down there at my own cost. And we're like, oh, this guy's awesome. Let's fill it up. So we filled up 2 trucks. This is just a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere. But the American people, you know, we're a charitable, giving, generous Christian people. We filled up 2 trucks in like a day. And they took off down there, and we thought, oh my goodness, here we are, man. We saw our suffering fellow American citizens, and what do? Well, we all banded together as a little community. We got the word out through the local radio station. We had some generous truckers, some real salt of the earth men who were going to take it down there for us, and we all banded together. And we didn't get the government to steal money from people and give it to us. We did it ourselves. It was all private. It was all voluntary. It was all from the heart. From the right people for the right reasons. So then the truckers get down there and they're calling us on their cell phones on the way until they get to about Gonzales. And FEMA stops them. FEMA stopped aid from getting down there. They turned them around. They had to go back to Baton Rouge. So then they asked FEMA, well, where can we take this? You got to get out of here. Well, I know, but I have 2 trucks full of supplies to help people who are suffering. And I'm almost there. I can like see them disappearing over the horizon. And they couldn't get any answers. There was no place to put the stuff. So what they did is they just left it in a parking lot and drove back because FEMA was running them out of there. And they're like, well, we'll just leave the supplies here and maybe someone can hopefully use them. But FEMA wasn't letting other charities down there to say, yeah, if you have resources, we'll take them and we'll distribute them. FEMA shut all that down. When the government shows up in a disaster area, a lot of times they run off the other people who got there first and were actually doing the initial help. See, because that's the other thing you don't see. FEMA comes in and they'll hold a press conference a day later, a couple days later, 3 days later, take all the credit. But you know who is the first one down there that actually helps people that need it? Private sector charities, Catholic charities, Salvation Army, Cajun Navy. The Cajun Navy was a big deal before. What was that, Hurricane Harvey, where we all found out about the Cajun Navy on a national level? Well, they're so good at that, it's because they have to do it a few times a year. Just goobers come by in their boats. And I mean goober is, I'm one of these people. I'm just some hick who crawled out of the forest. That's how people get saved. The government doesn't come save them. Maybe in extreme situations where you're in some boat on the ocean, a Coast Guard will come save you. But 99% of the people who need to be rescued get rescued by their neighbors. FEMA is nothing but an impediment. And when they get out of there and they go, who set up a camp? Salvation Army set up a camp. Sometimes the Red Cross set up a camp. Sometimes Catholic Charities has set up a camp. But you know where it's usually at? The local church. The local churches. They just come on. If you have nowhere to stay, you can stay in our gym. We'll get a bunch of cots. We'll get a bunch of sleeping bags. We'll get a bunch of pads. We'll get a bunch of air mattresses. And the government is far more of a hindrance in helping people in this time than they are a help. And it's so bad we need to get rid of FEMA. You know, we didn't always have FEMA. This is a recent creation. It used to be the federal government was not in the charity business. It wasn't until like the Great Depression where they even started doing things like this. 800-288-9227 if you have anything you want to add to this. But the government, like the price gouging laws, you don't understand how bad that hurts people in a disaster zone. If you could charge $6 for a bottle of water or $10 for a bottle of water, you may sound like a bad person to someone who has plenty of water. That's not fair. You're taking advantage of people in their time of need. Yeah, but if you could charge $10 for a bottle of water, you know how many thousands of people, probably maybe unemployed or maybe just good-hearted people, will go get water and rush down there? They will go into a danger zone. They will go into a disaster zone trying to bring you water. You take away that incentive, no one comes to help you with price gouging laws. If you can charge so much, then you know what? Other businesses will stay open. Your pizza shop will have a reason to stay open. If he can sell his pizzas for $40, that would be worth the risk. But if he has to charge regular price, then he's just going to get the heck out of there. He's going to evacuate. But if you can charge, and it's not gouging, it's just market price. If you're allowed for the free market to work, then businesses will have an incentive to like go get a generator and stay open and make sure people have food and resources and water and maybe even air conditioning. But price gouging, your only incentive there is to flee. And it makes fleeing harder too. You know, they don't allow hotels to upcharge as much with these price gouging laws. But if they did, like where New Orleans is and it's underwater, if you go across Lake Pontchartrain, it's above sea level. And a lot of people try and just evacuate there, but there's not a whole lot of hotels there. It's not a hot spot for tourism. So they just have to keep going it farther and farther and farther away. But if they let them charge ridiculous amounts when the demand got high enough to require it, there would be a whole cottage industry of hotels, and they would be empty most of the time, and they would stay in business because of the 2 or 3 or 4 big natural disaster, hurricane, storm events where everyone could just evacuate and go to the nearest safe place to buckle down. But government doesn't allow that to happen. Everyone would be selling water in a hurricane if you allowed the proper price mechanisms to work. Best Buy would be stocking it up. Your businesses that have nothing to do with water would be stocking it up. Toy stores would be stocking it up. But I don't know why they do this other than statists got to state, and statists are really bad at being efficient with scarce resources. But remember, the real hero in disaster recovery is you. It's your neighbor. It's your local church. And you're never going to get credit for it because they don't want to. But do you remember 10 years or so ago when there was the Ebola scare and the Time Magazine's Persons of the Year was the Ebola doctors? They specifically talked about Samaritan's Purse being the Ebola doctors. They never mentioned that was a Christian-based organization, a charity that was run by Franklin Graham. They never mentioned that. And I think that's part of the reason. They don't want Christians to get the credit. They want government to get the credit. And FEMA is the mechanism by which they do that. 800-288-9227, 800-288-9227. So for those of you who are trying to win tickets to see Scorpions in Vegas, that sounds like such a cool trip. This is your word right now. That we give you out different keywords. Your word right now, wind, W-I-N-D. You text it to 95819, 95819 for your chance to win. Another entry to win this trip. So listen for your next text-in clue before 5 p.m. today. For full list of contest rules, go to WBAP.com. 29 days until the election. We'll talk with Jim Varney of Real Clear Politics and see who's pulling ahead. Coming up next on The James Show, it's News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Hey there, welcome to The James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. The claim was made last week after Alejandro Mayorkas warned that FEMA's running out of funds. People were like, oh, so you had FEMA money for illegal immigrants and making sure these Haitians, whether or not they're eating dogs, they're still getting their rent subsidized by the taxpayers, by you and me, and maybe even Garrett a little bit over here. And then the pushback was like, well, that's not true. So I don't know if you paid attention to your social media feed over the weekend, but I paid attention to mine, and I must have seen this comparison like 400 times. And in case you didn't hear it, the first clip is from last week. The second clip you're going to hear is from September of 2022. So just a little over 2 years ago. Corinne Jean-Pierre asked about FEMA money being funneled to illegals. Changed her story.
It's categorically false. It is not true. It is a false statement. No, Biden did not take FEMA relief money to use on migrants. Funding is also available through FEMA's emergency food and shelter program to eligible local governments and non-for-profit organizations upon request to support humanitarian relief for migrants.
Gotcha. Busted. So now the goalposts have shifted a little bit. And they're like, no, that's not a lie. Because she said in the statement when she was asked if any FEMA funds have been used towards illegals, she said, no, we haven't used any disaster funds.
Categorically false. It is not true. It is a false statement. No, Biden did not take FEMA relief money
funds
to use on migrants. Funding is also.
And then she uses another category here. Is that the sleight of hand that they're trying to use to pretend like the answer that they want is true?
Available through FEMA's emergency food and shelter program.
Okay, so one was through the food and shelter program, the other one's from the relief program. So clearly, we didn't use FEMA funds. Yeah, that's still FEMA funds, you geniuses, you lying, intentionally misleading punks. We all know what that is. We didn't say was it from that specific bucket of FEMA. The point stands that FEMA's out of money now, and they spend billions on illegal immigrants. And then the internet, the ninjas on the internet were just working overtime over the weekend. People were digging up like spreadsheets off the FEMA website, and they're like going through the budget and taking a screenshot and be like, here it is. Here's another $1.9 billion that was used for a housing program. Here's another $1.2 billion that was used for cash payments, debit card payments. And they're going through like line by line and picking out all the stuff in FEMA for illegals. And let me ask you something. If FEMA has money for illegals but not for Americans, shouldn't we just abolish FEMA? Is this a huge embarrassing failure? You're told that, oh, you need this, or you're going to have a hard time. Americans are going to suffer after a natural disaster. Well, meanwhile, Americans are suffering after a natural disaster. Billions, tens of billions of dollars was taken from you under the lie, the fraud that would be used in case you were in an emergency, and gave it to non-Americans. For what purpose? If it's not to steal the election, then they're just really magnanimous about immigrating people from crappy countries into swing states, and that's just a coincidence. I mean, I don't even know if that's a believable counter argument at this point. But that was the clip of the weekend. Man, I must have saw that seriously like 10 times, maybe 20 times. And another one was. And this isn't, I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say all liberals are this hateful and liberals are mean and Democrats are bad people. No, they're not. But some of them are. And some of them, I think, are otherwise decent people who have just been fed a steady diet of hatred toward Team Red. That this is sort of almost a rational response once you believe an irrational worldview. Libs of TikTok passed along it's a young lady. She looks like she's 20, 25, maybe 30 at the most. But she was looking at all the hurricane victims, and what was it? Oh, this is a bunch of rural, white, Trump-voting, flyover country bigots is what it was. It's not so bad. She almost celebrates it.
When the hurricane hit North Carolina and Tennessee, the first thing I thought was, damn, there goes some racists. There we go. We got some gone. And then I just seen this video that like the area it hit is like sundown town after sundown town after sundown town, and they are just completely flattened and gone. And I was like, God's work. God's work.
Okay, now a lot of people go nuts on that, and they're like, that is evil, that is wrong. This girl's an evil person. No, this is a normal person who has been convinced that there is sundown towns, that there are racists out there in mass numbers, that Team Red is full of just foaming at the mouth, white supremacist Nazis just on the precipice of oppressing people just for sport, just for fun, just because they're scared. The crazy part is that she believes that. Do you really think there's one sundown town in America? Let me give you a hint. There's not. No one would put up with it these days. Like, I am from a tiny town I think it's like 594 people. It was 614 when I was growing up. I think we took a step back, like a family moved or I moved, really. It's not even that there. What are you talking? Where's this sundown town? Name one. You're just slandering thousands of people because you think they're in the demographic that opposes you politically. What a horrible worldview you have. And it's only rational if you really think that these people are bigots. Well, where have they heard that? MSNBC, CNN, musicians, actors, they're college professors. The question is, unless you get out of a big city bubble, where haven't you heard that? Sad stuff, isn't it? Almost breaks your heart. She'll grow up. She's young. Hopefully, she'll meet one of these people that she's so used to slandering and has been trained to hate and be like, oh my goodness, they're not nearly as bad as they made them out on TV. And we'll convert her eventually. It's just this is what you're up against. All right, listen close. This is your next chance to win that trip to Vegas. We're giving away the trip to see Scorpions at Planet Hollywood. You text live right now. This is your key word for this hour. Live. Live. 95819. 95819. Text live to that. Yeah, your next chance to win is coming on the WBAP morning show. For a full list of contest rules, WBAP.com. All right, stick around because coming up next, the great one, Mark Levin and then Chris Crock, and then you'll start your day right back here on WBAP. But in the meantime, if you need more James Show action, the podcast lives on WBAP.com, the WBAP app, and really just about anywhere you're listening to podcasts. If it's on like a major platform, if you search for the James Show, there's a good chance it'll pop up James Show or James Parker. So go find me there. Tell someone about the James Show today. Help me spread the word. Help me grow this thing. I got 4 kids, and I would like one of them to go to college. And just if you could help a brother out, that'd be nice. I'm James Parker. This has been the James Show. News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3.